For as long as I can remember, the phrase, the Kol Nidrei sermon, has always been synonymous with the phrase, the Israel sermon. The congregation that I grew up in has had only 3 senior rabbis, Rick Jacobs, Sue Ann Wasserman, and Serge Lipp. Going all the way back, I remember walking into the sanctuary each Kol Nidrei and hearing people murmur, I wonder what the rabbi will say about Israel this year. Each year for 25 years, I heard only sermons about Israel on Kol Nidrei. Then I went to Israel for seminary. I went to High Holy Day services at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion campus in Jerusalem, overlooking the old city, and looking down from our prayer space, you could see the Jaffa Gate and the glow of the Kotel in the background. And I was betting that I would get a reprieve from the Israel sermon that year. And what do you think the rabbi spoke about? Israel. When I came back to the States, I received a solo pulpit for the holidays at the Bates College Hillel. It was the first time I could choose for myself what would be spoken about for Kol Nidrei. What would I do? Would I venture away from Israel or play it safe? I played it safe and spoke about Israel. When the service was over, one of the students came over to me and said, "Nice sermon, but I was wondering, does your seminary tell you what to preach about? Because it seems like you all talk about the same stuff for the same service every single year." When I came back when I had my 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th year pulpits, every rabbi, North Shore Synagogue, Shari Tefillah in the city, always spoke about Israel on Kol Nidrei. Eventually, I made my way here as an assistant rabbi. And what do you know? On Kol Nidrei, Rabbi Miller got up to this very pulpit, and what do you think he spoke about? Yep, you guessed it, Israel. The sermon would end and then would be followed up by the collecting of Israeli bond pledges and a closing song of Hatikva. Keep in mind, I'm good with this tradition. I think it's important to speak about Israel. I bring this up because I'm really curious about when and where did this tradition come from. Not just at Anshe AEMT, but collectively. And no, the Central Conference of American Rabbis does not send out a list of what topics we should talk about on what days. By the way, I get that question every year. And I do know of colleagues that either don't speak about Israel at all, or they speak about Israel at some other point during the days of awe. For decades, support for Zionism has been a cornerstone of the American Jewish civil religion. But that hasn't always been the case. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Reform Judaism had largely negative views on Zionism. But following Nazi persecution, global anti-Semitism, and then the formation of the State of Israel, that all changed. So yes, at some point in our congregation's 161-year history, the rabbi probably didn't mention Israel from the pulpit at all. And if he did, especially if it were before the 1930s and 40s, it might have been to lambast the Zionist enterprise. Before the founding of the State of Israel, the comments of Seth Rogen and Mark Marion, which stirred such controversy this past summer, would probably have been regarded as mainstream opinion in the Reform movement. By the way, it's certainly understandable if you have no idea what the controversy that I just mentioned was about. As a rabbi, I received countless requests to sign on to multiple condemnations but also countless requests to sign onto positions applauding his comments. But for the rest of us, it was another day in quarantine. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is what happened. Mark Marion, a comedian who is Jewish, has a podcast. In the end of July, he brought onto the show Seth Rogen, who is a famous actor and also Jewish. And he was going to talk about his new movie, American Pickle, which is an incredibly Jewish movie, by the way. During the show, Seth and Mark started talking about Israel, and this is what Seth said. With regards to his religious education, I was fed a huge amount of lies about Israel. To me, it just seems that Zionism is an antiquated thought process. If it is for religious reasons, I don't agree with it because I think religion is silly. If it is for truly the preservation of Jewish people, it makes no sense because, again, you don't keep something you're trying to preserve all in one place, especially when that place is proven to be pretty volatile, you know? It doesn't make sense to me. And I also think as a Jewish person, I was fed a huge amount of lies about Israel my entire life. They never tell you that, oh, by the way, there were people there. They make it seem like it was just sitting there, like the doors open. They forget to include the fact to every young Jewish person. I admit, I might have removed an expletive here or there. It is Kol Nidrei after all. Instead of blasting Seth and Mark or bringing up the validity or errors of their statements or the responses, of which there are numerous errors in my belief in what he said, and I couldn't disagree with him more, I do, however, want to examine it from a different perspective. Truthfully, if you want to know more about the responses and the condemnations, all you need to do is Google Mark Marion, Seth Rogen, comments on Israel. And you can read it all for yourself. I can't add anything more to the plethora of loud responses that are already out there. No, where my interest lies is with his comments on how he was taught about the state of Israel. I have often thought back to my own education as a Jewish teen, and I have thought greatly on what good education looks like when teaching a love of country, whether Israel or America. I think too many of us had teachers that when it came to education about our nation's history, some may have confused education for indoctrination, or rather replaced education with indoctrination. Education opens the mind, opens the door for growth and thought, of probing and learning. Indoctrination, on the other hand, closes it. It teaches a mindless point of view that is typically black and white. These people are good, these people are bad. This country is good, this country is bad. There's very little tolerance for nuance, and when the curtain of understanding or awareness is pulled open, and we see the blemishes that everyone in every country and every people have, the indoctrinated mind has three choices. It can either reject the indoctrination that it was fed and move into the realm of education and discovery, or it can reject the truth that doesn't fit with the worldview that it has, or perhaps sitting in a world of disillusionment, it can just cast off the subject altogether. I think the latter, that rejection, is what has led a generation of our youth to completely reject Israel. And it's disheartening and sad. When it comes to both Israel and America, there are many who see our two countries differently now than they did 20 years ago. They aren't happy with its direction or are disappointed with new policies and decisions. They become disenchanted and disinterested, angry and resentful. How do we deal with that dissatisfaction? We all wrestle with the question of how we cope with what to do when our flaws are revealed and our ideal is found to be faulty. Our ideal country or our ideal self. Yom Kippur is the day when the veil of lies we tell ourselves is supposed to be removed, and we are to examine our misgivings and the flaws of our community. But the acknowledgement of these flaws is a good thing. It's why people like Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not only a patriot, but also a tzaddik. She saw the flaws of our society, and instead of believing a false narrative around them, or just accepting the flaws for what they were, she sought to right them. She understood the Jewish principle that we receive a world that is broken and is incumbent upon us to work to perfect it. We may never see that glorious moment out in the future, but we need to be part of the project. We cannot desist from it. The acknowledgement of flaws should be prized, but especially when they lead to activism. I think we speak about Israel on Kol Nidrei because today more than other days, we are reminded of our peoplehood. We are reminded that over the epochs we have been and continue to be a tribe wandering from country to country. That we are more than just a collective of individuals who are bound together through a theology. We are a people. And sometimes we reside in other countries, and sometimes we reside within our own. Tonight we think about what it means to live a Jewish life. And that means we need to think about what it means to be a Jew living in the world around us, a world that is slightly broken but still full of goodness. Our liturgy over the next 24 hours will be littered with questions about what it means when our society errs. What does it mean to be Jewish and to be a people who are oppressed but also a people with power? What does it mean to feel responsibility to other Jews and to other people? What does it mean to be an assimilated Jew? And what does it mean to be a people with a country of our own that is supposed to live up to our Jewish ideals? We will speak of our vulnerability, but we will also speak of our strength. Tonight is not a night for reaffirming our worldview. Tonight is a night when we challenge it. Kol Nidrei is a time for reflection, and it's a time for rebirth. It's a time for us to cast off the forces of indoctrination and to reject them. This is not a time for sermons that comfort us, but cause us to sit uneasy at times. Almost all of our tradition is not about telling us what we should believe in. It tells us what we should do as Jews, what are Jewish behaviors and norms. And yes, we have redefined that in every generation, but it has also been redefined as we understand ourselves as being part of a great chain of tradition. How are you plugged into that chain of tradition? Do you make decisions based upon your political realms and try and make Judaism match that point of view? Or are you starting from a Jewish point of view, wondering, how do I deal with the homeless person on the street? How do I deal with a country that might want me to embrace indoctrination? How do I deal with the wrongs around me? Do I take action? Or do I just accept it? Israel is, for many of us, an embodiment of what it means for Jews to act in the world. It is supposed to be an ideal. And when we disengage as a response to disillusionment, we abdicate our role in its growth and development, its evolution as a Jewish state, and it also can blind us for when Israel does right in the world. And it blinds us when we see all of the blessings and saving power that it has. The same is true when we find ourselves to be cynics when it comes to America. Yom Kippur is a day when we reaffirm that actions matter and that they make a difference, not just to us, but to others as well. It is also a day where we are reminded that we may not be indifferent. May we all remember on this Yom Kippur, perhaps more than any previous one, that what we say and what we do matter. Let us reaffirm that we are a people raised on self-examination, on looking within and around us, so that we can help heal and mend our society, whether here or in Israel, so that all may live in peace. Amen. V'amen.